The air was heavy with dust and judgment. A worn wooden sign creaked overhead in the afternoon breeze. Willow Creek Livestock Auction. Beneath it, a crowd gathered like vultures, boots scuffing the dirt, voices sharp with mockery and bids. Horses were paraded through the lot like merchandise, each animal tugged along by thick ropes and thinner hopes. Laughter broke out near the pens, the kind that didn't come from joy, but from ridicule. They were laughing at Lot 27. The horse stood awkwardly in the center of the commotion, an overweight bay gelding with a sagging belly, matted coat, and the slow, uncertain shuffle of a creature long forgotten by speed or pride. His name, scratched faintly on the worn tag around his neck, was Gus. Gus's eyes were distant. He didn't flinch at the jeers or the flash of a phone camera. He didn't buck or snort or prance. He simply stood there, like something tired of proving it still deserved a place in the world. His hooves were cracked, his mane tangled, and his spirit, if it hadn't left entirely, seemed hidden behind a wall only few could see past. "Looks like someone fed him donuts instead of oats," a man barked, doubling over with laughter. "Bet he'd do better pulling a food truck than a cart," another chimed in. No one batted an eye at the cruelty. The auctioneer smirked and tried to keep things light. "Now, folks, don't all jump in at once for this fine specimen." But even he knew Gus was just filler between the real showpieces. Most came to bid on sleek thoroughbreds or agile barrel racers, not this bloated shadow of a horse. Gus wasn't there to be bought. He was there to be dismissed. But someone was watching closely, not from the front row, where the wealthier buyers waved their paddles, but from the back, near the split fence. A man leaned quietly against the wood, his hat tipped low and his hands calloused and cracked. He was older, maybe 60, dressed in faded denim and a button-down worn so thin you could almost see the history sewn into it. His boots were scuffed, not from fashion but from work. Real work. His name was Eli. Eli hadn't come for a horse. Not exactly. He hadn't planned on bidding or even lingering long. Truth was, he'd only driven into town to pick up feed and drop off an old saddle for repair. But something about the way the crowd laughed at that horse made him stop. It was a laugh he knew too well, the kind that rang through schoolyards and barrooms, aimed at anyone who didn't fit, who wasn't fast enough, strong enough, pretty enough. It was the laugh that haunted anyone who'd ever been considered less. He had heard it himself once. Too many times. Gus shifted his weight, slow and tired, eyes flickering toward the edge of the ring, as if he'd sensed a change in atmosphere. Eli didn't move. He just watched. "All right," the auctioneer barked. "We'll start bidding at 100. Do I hear 100? 80? 60? Silence. 40? Come on now, folks. It costs more than that." Someone in the crowd shouted, "He's probably got diabetes." More laughter. Eli straightened and stepped forward. 20, he said. Heads turned. A few chuckled. "Sir, this horse comes as is. No refunds, no vet papers, no guarantees," the auctioneer warned, more out of habit than concern. "I said 20, Eli repeated, not raising his voice. The auctioneer looked around, waiting for a challenge. None came. "Sold," he said finally, dropping the gavel with the enthusiasm of a man closing the register on an empty till. "Lot 27 goes to the gentleman in the back. Godspeed." Eli nodded once. He didn't smile. He didn't look for approval. He just stepped over the dusty gate, approached Gus with slow, deliberate steps, and offered a flat hand. The horse hesitated, then sniffed. His breath was warm and ragged. Eli patted the gelding's neck. Under the layers of grime and fat was muscle softened, but not gone. "You've seen some things," Eli murmured. Gus exhaled through his nose. Maybe it was agreement. Maybe it was just breath. They walked together out of the ring, one slow step at a time. Gus limped slightly on his left hind leg, but he kept moving, head low but ears flicking curiously now and then. Some in the crowd muttered under their breath. Others just shook their heads. "Crazy old man. What's he going to do with that?" Eli ignored them all. He loaded Gus into a battered trailer hitched to his old pickup. No fanfare, no assistance, no special ramp, just patience, a whisper, and a hand on the lead rope that didn't tug, just guided. As the truck pulled away, The auctioneer moved on to the next lot. A shiny chestnut filly strutted into the ring, and the crowd's attention snapped back with the ease of habit. Gus was already forgotten, but not by Eli. Miles down the highway, past wheat fields turned gold in the setting sun, the truck rumbled toward a quiet stretch of land nestled between two low hills. Eli's farm was small, fewer animals than he used to have, more silence than he wanted. His wife had passed 3 years ago. His kids had moved away. The barn hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade, but it stood firm, stubborn, like the man who owned it. Eli opened the trailer gate and stepped aside. Gus hesitated before clambering down, stiff but willing. He sniffed the air, ears turning toward the distant rustle of wind through grass and the distant whinny of another horse. There was life here, though quiet. Space. Time. Eli led him to a fenced paddock. It wasn't grand, but it was clean and green. Gus walked in without protest, turned once, and lowered his head to graze. Eli leaned on the fence and watched. He said nothing. Somewhere an old wind chime stirred. A breeze carried the scent of hay and river water. In that moment, there was no crowd, no auctioneer, no laughter. Just a tired man and a tired horse, breathing the same quiet air. And though neither said a word, something had begun. Not a miracle. Not yet. But something. The first night was silent, save for the soft rustle of hay and the occasional shifting of hooves. Gus stood alone in the paddock under a navy blue sky, moonlight casting a silvery outline around his worn frame. He didn't lie down, didn't sleep. He stood, staring at the dark beyond the fence, as if unsure whether this place was real or just a pause in some crueler journey. Inside the farmhouse, Eli sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and an open notebook. The pages were filled with messy lines, lists, notes from years gone by, horse names, training logs, dates. He turned to a blank page and slowly wrote Gus at the top. Under it, he scribbled a few quick thoughts. Slight limp, right shoulder favors, teeth bad, overweight, not just lazy, watch eyes. He underlined that last note twice. He'd seen it before. Horses with no fire left, no spark behind the eyes. Most never got it back. But there was something about Gus's silence that felt less like surrender and more like defense. A quiet dog doesn't mean a gentle one. Sometimes, it just means it's been kicked too often. The next morning, Eli opened the barn doors early. Mist still curled low across the field. He walked to the paddock with a halter in one hand and a pocket full of chopped apples in the other. Gus watched him come, ears flicking but body still. He didn't step forward, didn't flinch either. Just stood like a statue as Eli approached. "You and me, we're going to work something out," Eli said, voice low. He extended the halter, slow and open. Gus didn't move. Eli didn't push. After a long, quiet moment, he dropped the halter on the ground and offered the apple bits from his palm. Gus sniffed, nostrils flaring. Then, with surprising gentleness, he took the fruit and chewed. "Good," Eli murmured. "Tomorrow, we try the halter." He walked away without another word. The days followed a rhythm. Eli never forced contact. He'd approach Gus, offer food, speak calmly, sometimes not at all. He cleaned the paddock, fixed the fence rail Gus leaned too hard against, and slowly introduced the halter again. By the fourth morning, Gus let him slip it over his head. No fight, just acceptance. Wariness, but no panic. By the end of the week, Eli had walked Gus around the paddock in slow circles. The limp was still there, less pronounced, but noticeable. His weight had barely changed, but his posture had. There was less sag, more curiosity. He lifted his head more often, ears twitching at distant sounds. He watched Eli closely now, tracking every move, every rustle of denim. One afternoon, as the sun burned low in the sky and shadows stretched long across the paddock, Eli stood at the gate, arms crossed, watching Gus chew a mouthful of hay. "You don't move like a lazy horse," he muttered. "You move like someone who learned to stay still to survive." Gus flicked an ear but didn't stop chewing. Eli didn't expect a response. He didn't need one. He just needed time. That evening, a knock came at the farmhouse door. It was Sam, Eli's neighbor from 2 miles down, a wiry man in his 50s who'd known Eli since their rodeo days. He stepped in without waiting for an invite, carrying a thermos of coffee and the day's newspaper. "Saw you bought a horse," he said, pouring them both a cup. "I did. That the fat one from the auction?" Eli didn't answer. Sam shrugged and took a sip. "Can't say I would have bothered. You planning to keep him? Or just get him back on his feet and pass him on?" "Not sure yet," Eli replied. "Just trying to figure out what he needs." Sam leaned back in the chair, looking at him thoughtfully. "That sounds more like what you need." Eli didn't rise to the bait. He just stared out the window, where Gus was now lying down for the first time since he arrived, curled like a great brown stone in the grass. "I think he's waiting for someone to give him a reason to trust again," Eli said quietly. Sam nodded. "Aren't we all?" As the weeks passed, progress came in inches. Gus began following Eli without the lead rope, his gait still uneven but more determined. They started short groundwork sessions in the round pen, turns, stops, light lunging. Gus was clumsy at first, then gradually steadier. He listened, not because he was trained, but because he was willing. There was a difference, and Eli respected it. One afternoon, after a particularly smooth session, Eli crouched beside Gus's leg, checking the joint swelling he'd been monitoring. The limp, while better, hadn't vanished. Gus shifted slightly, but didn't resist. Eli pressed gently along the tendon line, feeling for heat or resistance. "You've got some old damage," he murmured. "Nothing fresh. Probably healed wrong. Could be arthritis, maybe some calcification." He stood and patted Gus's neck. "You won't be racing barrels, but you're not broken. Not if you're still trying." That night, Eli sat at the table again, adding more notes under Gus's name. Trust growing. Still guarded. Follows off lead. Limb improving. No buck. No kick. Watch for pain flare-ups. He paused, then added one more line. Likes to be spoken to. Spring crept into the valley, bringing wildflowers to the hills and a fresh coat of green to the fields. The barn smelled of new hay and warm earth. One morning, as Eli slid open the gate to let Gus out for a longer walk around the property, something changed. Gus trotted, not far and not fast, but it wasn't fear or panic. It was play. Eli watched, stunned, as the big gelding tossed his head and gave a few awkward bucks before slowing to a brisk walk, tail lifted high. It was ungainly and stiff and utterly beautiful. For the first time since bringing him home, Eli smiled wide. "You still got it," he said. The moment didn't last long. Gus stumbled slightly on a divot in the field and slowed, panting. But he didn't stop. He circled back to Eli and stood by his side, ears perked, waiting. "You just needed a reason," Eli whispered, voice tight. Behind them, the clouds began to roll in, low and dark. The sky shifted, and a cool wind swept the field. A storm was coming. Eli turned toward the house, Gus following close. Tomorrow they would do more. Maybe push a little further. Maybe uncover something neither of them had expected. But for now, Eli knew one thing for certain. The horse the world had laughed at was no joke, and neither was the man who chose him. The rain came hard that night, drumming the tin roof like a war drum. Eli lay awake, listening. He wasn't worried about the storm itself. He'd weathered worse. But about how Gus would handle it. Horses had long memories. Some storms didn't just soak the ground. They stirred the ghosts in an animal's mind. At dawn, the clouds had passed, leaving behind a soaked paddock and heavy fog rolling across the pasture. Eli pulled on his boots and stepped out into the chill air, heart tight with worry. As he rounded the barn, he saw Gus standing near the fence, soaked but calm, his mane plastered to his thick neck, tail heavy with rain. He was waiting. Eli exhaled, slow and deep. "You're tougher than you look," he said, walking closer. "Guess that makes two of us." That morning marked a shift, not in routine, but in rhythm. Gus no longer needed coaxing. He met Eli at the gate, walked with purpose during their training sessions, and even began responding to soft vocal cues. They weren't doing anything impressive by competition standards, but that wasn't the point. Trust was being built, day by day, brick by fragile brick. Eli started talking more during their time together, not out of habit, but connection. He told Gus about old ranch days, about horses he'd known and lost. He shared the story of Belle, his first mare, the one he trained from a foal and buried under a cottonwood tree 15 years ago. Gus listened, ears twitching, occasionally glancing at Eli like he understood more than a horse should. The town, small as it was, began whispering. People had seen them, man and horse, walking the long fence line, moving with slow, deliberate grace. Some said Eli was wasting time on a hopeless cause. Others said he was just lonely. But a few saw what Eli saw. The horse wasn't just changing. He was healing. One afternoon, a truck rolled up the drive, dust trailing in its wake. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, sunburnt shoulders, sharp eyes. Her name was Danielle, and she ran the nearby animal rehab center. She'd heard about Gus through Sam, who'd seen something in the way Eli talked about the gelding. "I'd like to see him," she said. Eli hesitated, then led her to the paddock. Gus stood at the far end, but turned as they approached. "He still limps," Eli said. "Old injury." "Likely. Nothing surgical. Just needs time." Danielle watched Gus approach slowly, eyes narrowing. "He's alert. Curious. That's good. He wasn't before." She knelt slightly as Gus came closer, letting him sniff her outstretched hand. "You know," she said, without looking back, "we get a lot of broken ones at the center. Some bounce back. Some don't. But very few ever come back with dignity." Eli stayed quiet. Danielle stood and faced him. "He has dignity. That's your doing." Eli almost laughed. He earned that himself. They talked a while longer, and when Danielle left, she handed Eli a card. "If you ever want him seen by a specialist, I know one in the city. Won't charge much. Likes the hard luck stories." "I'll think about it." He didn't call. Not yet. He still had something to prove, to himself, more than anyone else. That night, Eli walked to the paddock under a violet dusk sky. Gus met him halfway, nudging his arm gently. Eli ran a hand down the horse's wet neck. "You feel that," he whispered. "They're starting to see you." Gus snorted softly. "But they don't know you yet. Not like I do." By the next week, Eli introduced a saddle. Not for riding yet, just to see how Gus responded. The first time, the horse tensed, muscles rigid under the leather. Eli moved slow, careful. No straps. Just wait. Gus didn't bolt. Didn't buck. He stood, uncertain but willing. Over the next few days, Eli added the cinch, then led Gus around the paddock with the saddle in place. Gus moved cautiously, like trying on an old memory he wasn't sure fit anymore. Then came the morning Eli mounted for the first time. He did it like a whisper. No stirrups, just a gentle swing of the leg, and a soft seat in the saddle. Gus froze. His ears flicked back, then forward. Eli didn't urge him. He just sat still, balanced, waiting. After a long moment, Gus took a single step forward. Eli smiled. "There we go." They didn't do much that day. Just a few slow laps in the round pen. But it was a milestone. That night, Eli opened a drawer in his old desk and pulled out a photograph. It was faded, curled at the edges. A younger Eli stood beside Belle, hand on her neck, both of them strong and proud. He placed the photo on the mantel above the fireplace. "You'd have liked him," he said softly. The following weekend, Eli took Gus beyond the paddock. They walked down the old trail behind the barn, where the trees arched overhead and the path was soft with fallen leaves. The air was sweet with spring and the sound of birdsong. Gus moved with care but confidence. The limp was still there, but it didn't slow him. They walked nearly a mile before Eli turned them back. As they returned, they passed a roadside fence where, years ago, Eli had trained colts in full view of the town. A few cars slowed as they went by. A kid on a bike pointed. A man rolled down his window and shouted, "That the auction horse?" Eli raised a hand in quiet reply. He didn't need to say anything. Not yet. But it was coming. He could feel it. That night, as Eli brushed Gus down, he noticed something in the gelding's eyes. A softness. A shine. The dull vacancy from the auction was gone, replaced by something warmer, cautious still, but alive. "You're almost there," Eli said. He stepped back, brushing his hands clean on his jeans. Gus watched him with calm patience, then walked forward and pressed his large head gently into Eli's chest. Eli stood frozen, heart clenched, the ache in his ribs something old and familiar. He placed a hand over Gus's jaw, steady and grateful. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about becoming whole again, together. The morning of the fair arrived with a quiet electricity in the air. Dew clung to the grass like silver lace, and a low mist hovered just above the ground. Eli stood in the barn aisle, rubbing a soft cloth over Gus's coat. The once patchy fur had grown thick and lustrous, and though his gait still carried a slight hitch, the horse now held himself with a presence no one could deny. Eli adjusted the simple leather halter, his fingers steady, but his chest a knot of nerves. He hadn't planned on entering. The county fair wasn't about redemption. It was about ribbons, parades, and appearances. But the announcer at the town's feed store had mentioned a new exhibition category: Rescued Hope Transformation Showcase. Not a competition, just a chance to show what resilience looked like. Gus had earned that. "You ready?" Eli asked, more to himself than the horse. Gus blinked slowly, then dipped his head, brushing Eli's chest. A habit now, one that felt like a promise. The trailer ride was slow and quiet. Eli drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the dash, his thoughts a swirl of memories and what-ifs. When they pulled into the fairgrounds, he parked far from the crowd. Too many eyes, too many judgments still lingering. He didn't want to overwhelm Gus, or himself. He opened the trailer door, and Gus backed out with care, ears flicking at the unfamiliar sounds, children laughing, cattle lowing, distant music from the carousel. But he didn't spook. He didn't flinch. He stood tall, surveying the scene like a soldier returning to a battlefield, older and stronger. The exhibition was held in the old arena behind the main pavilion. A modest crowd had gathered in the bleachers, sipping coffee and chatting while the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. One by one, the rescued animals were led into the ring. Dogs with new limbs, ponies once emaciated now round with life, a mule that had survived a barn fire. Eli waited in the shaded corner, heart beating hard as he watched each story unfold. Then the announcer called his name. And now Eli Dawson and Gus. A horse many saw as nothing more than a joke. Overweight, unwanted, unfixable. But Eli saw something else. Eli inhaled sharply and walked Gus into the ring. For a moment silence fell. Then came the murmurs, soft, surprised. Not cruel, not mocking, just taken aback. Gus moved slowly, but with purpose. Eli didn't parade him. He just walked alongside him, letting the horse speak through presence alone. The audience leaned in as the announcer recounted Gus's journey, from the day he stood trembling at auction, mocked and ignored, to the stormy nights and quiet mornings of rebuilding. Eli stopped in the center and looked up at the crowd, but he didn't smile or wave. He just rested a hand on Gus's neck and nodded. They didn't stay long after that. No need. The moment had been enough. Back at the trailer, a man in a gray vest approached them. His face was familiar, tight-jawed, sun-weathered. Eli recognized him after a second. Curtis Mays, one of the bidders from the auction. He'd laughed the loudest when Gus was brought out. "I'll be," Curtis muttered. "That the same horse?" Eli didn't answer. Curtis scratched his neck uneasy. "Didn't think he'd last a week, if I'm honest. I was wrong." Eli gave a small nod. "We all are sometimes." Curtis glanced at Gus. "Looks good. Real good." "He is." After a pause, Curtis said, "If you ever breed him out." "He's a gelding." Curtis looked embarrassed. Right, of course." He gave an awkward half-salute and walked off. Eli watched him go, then turned to Gus. "Imagine that. You shut up Curtis Mays without saying a word." That night, they didn't go home right away. Instead, Eli drove past the ranch and headed up the hill to the old overlook, the place where Belle used to graze on summer evenings. He parked the truck and opened the back gate. Gus stepped out, drawn by the cool breeze and wide horizon. They stood there, overlooking the valley, the sky streaked orange and lavender, stars just beginning to pierce through. "I never thought I'd be back here with another horse," Eli said, his voice low. caught somewhere between grief and peace. But I think she'd be okay with it. Gus nudged him gently, then lowered his head to graze. Eli sat on the tailgate and watched the light fade. All around them was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a man more than it empties him. In the days that followed, word about Gus spread. A few articles ran in local papers. A short clip of their walk in the ring went modestly viral online. People called Eli, asking about his methods. Some wanted advice. Others offered donations. One even wanted to adopt Gus. Eli declined politely. He's where he belongs. The ranch, once still and empty, slowly found its rhythm again. Danielle visited more often, sometimes bringing rehab cases for Eli to evaluate. A teenage boy started coming by on weekends, brushing down Gus, asking questions, soaking up Eli's quiet instruction. Eli didn't call him an apprentice, not yet, but the idea didn't seem so strange anymore. As for Gus, he changed in ways words couldn't measure. He'd never be fast or sleek. His body still bore the marks of neglect and age, but his spirit was clean and strong. He stood proud, not because someone made him, but because someone believed in him when no one else would. And in return, he gave Eli something back, something he hadn't even realized he'd lost, the will to try again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields turned gold, Eli led Gus to the edge of the property. There, near the cottonwood tree where Belle was buried, he placed a small horseshoe on the fence post. It was old and worn, with the name Gus etched into the iron. A token, a marker, not of where they began, but of how far they'd come. As the wind rustled through the leaves, Eli whispered, "Thank you." Gus raised his head, ears forward, the last light of day catching his eyes like fire. And in that moment, neither of them were broken. They were whole.